Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm the principal designer and owner of ARCIFORM, and I'm looking forward to spending the next hour and a half with you. With me today are two of my team members from ARCIFORM. It's Marty Haig and Sarah Cruz. We can't hear you, I can't hear you, and we can't see you, but if you'd like to participate today, use the little Q&A button located below and submit any questions you may have. Marty and Sarah will be monitoring the questions, and we will get to as many as we can. We have 2 breaks during the presentation, at which time I'll get to answering some of your questions. After the presentation, watch your inbox for the pop quiz. Answer the questions correctly, and you will receive the ARCIFORM certified logo bug to proudly display on your website to use in your signature line. Go here, next. Of course, my next button is not working. Oh, 1 second. Next. Oh, next. There. Oh, very good. Oh, but I went too far. No, I didn't. Principal design. Okay. So we also will follow up the presentation with a nice little cheat sheet for you that we put together for future reference. So you don't have to take too many notes, as we'll have a nice little list of styles and home shapes through the decades that we put together for you. And I'm honored to be featured in the next Designer Spotlight hosted by Snow Bee Designs, and would like to extend a personal invitation to you for you to join me this Saturday, December 19th at 11 a.m. for the YouTube premiere. You can find the link to this premiere on my website at arciform.com under the events section. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys then as well. ARCIFORM is a design build firm founded in 1997 by my husband, Richard, and we specialize in the restoration and remodel of structures built prior to the 1970s. We have a sister company called Versatile Wood Products. Versatile is in the same building as ARCIFORM. We have a 30,000 square foot wood shop. And so it's a wonderful symbiotic relationship where ARCIFORM provides a service, Versatile provides a product. And so we can talk to each other, figure out challenges, are very familiar with each other's processes, so it makes for a really efficient process. And the Versatile tradespeople are very, very good. So they can build you windows, doors, cabinetry. We build a lot of custom cabinetry for homes, lots of large windows for industrial buildings that are historic nature, and then some very contemporary assemblies as well. We meet very high performance and design standards. So here is our little certification bug that you will receive if you answer the questions correctly, that you can then proudly display. We would like to, today we're going to be covering Portland home styles, and I'm looking very much forward to getting rolling into this wonderful subject. There's some images of Portland in the 1840s. Portland used to be a stump town. It was a very, very wooded area. As you know, when you drive outside of Portland, it's pretty much forested. And when people started to settle, they started cutting down the trees and used that wood to build their houses. Asa Lovejoy and Francis Pettigrove built Portland's very first home in 1844, a log cabin near the present intersection of Southwest Washington Street and Front Avenue. The nickname for Portland at the time was Stumptown, and for very good reasons. Most early homes had no indoor plumbing. In the 1900s, I always get that confused, at 1900s, 18th century, so 1900s, I believe, a bowl pitcher and chamber pot were kept in a small cabinet or under the bed and emptied every morning. The outhouse was also known as the necessary. To use it, you had to walk through the kitchen to the back porch and down the path. often armed with some sort of tool in case you got an unwelcome visitor in the shape of a bear or a wolf or a coyote or a snake. So not super pleasant, but necessary. Bathing required heating water and then sharing a tub with your fellow family members. I would think a washcloth went a long way, and a quick dip in the river while cold might have been a nice, refreshing alternative to sharing dirty tap-it water. What we want to consider when we are considering the architectural styles of Portland is how did the building materials and craftspeople get to the locations that they were building the houses in. So often people had to walk the wooden sidewalks, they had to take their bicycles, there were horse-drawn carriages, and then the streetcar started being built in 1890s, which helped develop the Southwest Hills and getting up all that steep incline, and bringing building materials and craftspeople as well as future residents up to the top of the hill. Bridges and streetcars were also going and connecting East and West Portland. Here's a picture of North Mississippi with a firehouse. In front of this was a horse-drawn carriage bringing the ladders and water to fires if necessary. Portland's craftspeople that helped build our beautiful city came from all over the world. They came from Europe, Asia, and the East Coast. There was Benson Polytechnic High School began in 1908 as Portland School of Trades. Internships and apprenticeships taught old world traditions to the countrymen and women of the New World. So you can see in a lot of old home styles that they had a lot in common with the East Coast and Europe. In 1894, the Willamette River flooded, and the central business district of Portland was underwater. Water remained there for days. Some Portlanders accepted this with humor and took aim at the decoys floating down the street in their fancy outfits. So this brings us to the first architectural style in Portland. It's called the Victorian era. It was popular from 1860 to the early 20th century, maybe even until 1910. Rapid industrialization and growth led to dramatic changes in the American house design due to mass productions. Access to exotic materials was possible thanks to the expanding railroad network. Colonialization and trade made especially Asian and Indian designs popular. Exuberance was the sign of wealth. So the more elaborate we can build our houses, dress ourselves, and decorate, the more wealthy we were. Think formal with little emphasis on comfort. Think very vertical. Houses were compartmentalized. Fashion was compartmentalized. Women were tied up into corsets. They were stuck and straight, and tall hats were fashionable, feathers, everything vertical. Think vertical. Top hats for men. Umbrellas were part of the accessories. This style roughly corresponds with the reign of Queen Victoria in Great Britain. It was a British and French custom to name architectural styles for the reigning monarch. Queen Victoria's wedding dress from 1840 is credited with starting the white wedding dress trend. And if you haven't yet, I would highly recommend you watch the Amazon Prime production of Victoria. It's a wonderful representation of that time period. Here's a kitchen from 1896, and even the cast iron range was ornately decorated. Curlicues, floral designs were very, very common, And here you can also see that some genius inventor brought in a pump to bring water into the house rather than having to go to a well outside of the home. Formal and glamour were, you know, kind of the trend of the times. Here's a picture of the Meyer and Frank in Portland in 1900s. You see the lady having her vertical hat, probably feathery. All the girls were wearing corsets with ruffles on their shirts. So ruffle, 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 accessorize, accessorize, accessorize. A sub-style of the Victorian era is the Italianate. So really, if you want to be well-versed in architectural history and you come into a home and want to know what was built, it is Victorian. If you don't want to go into too much technical detail, you can just say Victorian. If you want to sound a little bit more informed and know a little bit more of that era, there are subcategories like this Italianate Victorian. It's a very popular style from the 1860s to the 1900s. The identifying features of this style is 2 or 3 stories tall, a low-pitched roof. And you can see here, this is the Fried Dunkheimer house before ARCIFORM moved it. ARCIFORM moved this house through downtown Portland, through the Portland State University to its new location at the bottom of Southwest Broadway. And there was an addition built to add headroom that we ultimately removed. There's a picture of this in the next slide. So low-pitched roofs, moderate to wide overhangs with decorative brackets underneath, often very elaborate window crowns and arched windows, vertical lines, and coining at the corners to make the houses look like their inspiration, which were stone structures in Europe. And here you see some other examples of Italianate architecture in Portland. Oh, this one is in Ashland. And then the interior, as you can see, stiff vertical furnishings, vertical tall ceilings, cornices and covers for the windows, and lots of rouge and fluff. Here's the Fried Dunkheimer house after ARCIFORM restored it and in its new location in Southwest Broadway, on the bottom of Southwest Broadway. And you can see how beautiful the tradespeople executed their talents on these elaborate details in the overhangs. Again, tall ceilings, tall windows, arched doorways. Just no expense was spared on the decorations for these homes. Here's a famous Italianate for you guys to maybe use as a memory. Sparkle is the full house set in San Francisco. Then we have another subcategory of the Victorian style. It's the Second Empire. Again, popular 1860 to 1900. Identifying features is think Paris. The mansard style dual pitched roof was eclectic, very eclectic and ornate in their features. I hope I'm not putting myself in front of these slides when I'm moving this around. I'm moving you guys around, but I kind of have to see and move this off and on. But this is called a mansard roof, which was, if you have ever visited Paris or seen pictures of Paris, it's very, very dominant roof shape. These sorts of vertical, small arched dormers, eclectic in that different materials were being used, like wrought iron balustrades, as well as wood-turned balustrades, urns on top of newel post, turned columns. It's a very gracious, very castle-like style. And again, they want to resemble stone structures. Portland was full of trees, full of lumber. So this was all built in wood, then painted often in muted tones to look like stone. And then we have the Queen Anne Revival, which is 1880s through 1910. This is the most common Victorian style that most people identify this with Victorian style. And often people think Victorian style equates colorful, and but it doesn't. The previous two, the Italianate and the Second Empire, were definitely more muted and stone-like. Now the Queen Anne Revival embraced the fact that Portland had wood and so didn't try to look like stone structures, was whimsical and inspired by the Queen Anne era of the 1710s in Europe or Britain. Steeply pushed roof, often irregular shapes, patterned shingles, scalloped shingles, lap siding, tongue and groove siding, vertical siding, horizontal siding, everything that we had here that we can, out of wood, that we can attach to these houses, we did attach to these houses. Wraparound porches, asymmetrical facades, bay windows, towers and turrets, and a lot of spindle work. So whimsical, beautiful style, created lots of compartmentalized spaces inside. So it was not an open floor plan, but again, vertical, tall ceilings. And here's a famous Queen Anne. It's Miss Doubtfire's movie set in San Francisco. Good help. This one is a little bit more symmetrical than its sisters, but it is a Queen Anne home. Here are other Queen Annes and other Victorians. So we have the Queen Anne, the John Palmer house in North Mississippi. Then we have a little bit of a farmhouse Victorian, which is stripped down, maintains its vertical detailing, but it's no unnecessary detailing like corbels and frills. This is a very timeless style that has a huge gain in popularity again today. And then you have a simpler Queen Anne style home with asymmetry, some turned columns and lattice work and beautiful little ornamentation, but simple. And the other two as well, you have a single story Queen Anne, but you can still tell it's a Queen Anne with this little bay window and front porch ornamentation and vertical windows. Here's the inside of the John Palmer house, and this is a contemporary version, so much less curtains and palm trees and ferns and peacock feathers than it would have been in the decorations of that era. But you can still see in the detailing of the light fixtures and the hardware, all the detailing that was popular in that time period. Lots of layers of wallpaper. Oftentimes houses had both gas and electricity coming to light fixtures. So here you can see the uplight would have had gas coming out of the socket, and the downlight would have had electrical, because people didn't trust either and they wanted to have a backup plan. So it's your dual fuel light fixture. So be aware of that when you want to upgrade in old buildings electricity. You might find gas pipes sticking out of the ceiling or at the sconce. Early Portland homes. Here again, you can see it's not always Victorian one way or another. You can see a combination where people were creative in their what they saw the neighbors doing, but maybe didn't literally copy what the Queen Anne identifiers were. So you can see a square home that often has more of a colonial flair already, which we'll cover a little bit more of later. And also you can see the Portland Foursquare, which we'll also talk about later already in 1864. So then we have a little simpler style. Whoops, I went too far. Then we have a little simpler style in the center home that is not quite as frilly as a Queen Victoria, but has some of its elements. And then it also adds some coining. So you have a combination of the two. And here you have something that would look more like a Second Empire or, wait, now I lost my train of thought, but it has elements of the other Victorians without being literally one of the previous styles. So again, just say Victorian and you'll be set. And here is an early colonial house. This is actually my house where I'm sitting right now. I am right here in my yellow round room. And this is built in 1904, just before the Lewis and Clark Expo. It's a colonial. It's a very ornate colonial, very grand mansion. We are very lucky to live here. Richard and I have been doing a lot of preservation work here and have open houses. When COVID is over, please check out our website for events we host here. It's a grand old house. The owners had wood shipped up from Brazil and South America, exotic woods. There's lots of inlays, lots of phenomenal detailing and craftsmanship. The Lewis and Clark's Expo, let me take a quick break. I need to have a sip of water. One moment, bubbly water. The Lewis and Clark Exposition came to Portland in 1905. It had over 1.5 million visitors and was hosted in Northwest Portland. The expo showcased economic growth, scientific and technological advances. Portland's population grew 130% in the first 10 years of the century, from 90,000 to 200,000 in 1910. Blocks of craftsman style and small starter homes were built on Portland's east side in the decade after the fair. So you can totally find all these beautiful little bungalows when you go up into Northeast Portland and East Portland in general, Southeast Portland. The opening day at the expo showcases the flamboyant style of that time with large hats, top hats, and you know, a little bit less corseted, but still formal dress. The National Cash Register building was moved after the fair to St. John's in North Portland. It has served as a church, American Legion Hall, a bingo parlor, and it's now the McMiniman's St. John's Theater and Pub. A lot of the structures in that fair were, like within the fair, were kind of neoclassical, lots of temples, lots of domes, but that didn't really translate into lots of Portland architecture. It was just something to showcase grandeur and make the fair exciting. The Hotel Fairmont sat across the street from the fair's entrance. It remains at Northwest 26th and Upshur. It is one of the last remaining structures from the expo and it houses apartments today. Building materials that were being developed at that time. We have shiplap, horizontal planks with two opposing rabbit joints that overlap each other. Shiplap may have originated in the shipbuilding industry. Again, people of Portland were using any building materials available to them. So if a ship came here and was too tired to set sail again, they would disassemble it and use those materials for building homes. It's weatherproof, and it provides stability to the homes. In the 1930s, it started being installed on the diagonal to add shear support to structures. And shear support just helps houses from going sideways. So oftentimes also old Victorians wouldn't have had any shiplap below their siding. So in today's need for adding insulation, oftentimes salespeople will come in and sell you blown-in insulation and cause more damage to the home than any insulation will provide by disconnecting the siding that was attached to the house from the framing. So be careful when you plan on putting insulation into your walls and make sure the house can support that. Plywood. The plywood manufacturing is thin layers of wood veneer glued together with additional layers, having their grain rotated by 90 degrees. This again adds stability and stiffness and strength. The plywood industry was actually born in Portland in 1905 for the World's Fair. And people were so excited they built a lot of the structures at the World Fair out of plywood, which is why they're no longer around. Other building materials of that era were subway tile. Subway tile was created for the first subway in New York in 1904. It became popular to the newfound obsession with germs. So white kitchens were built and bathrooms were built in the early 20th century because science had discovered that germs cause diseases and can transfer diseases. So they thought that if you can see dirt and you can clean it, so that way it would make it more sterile. So cleanliness was next to godliness. So that's why you see a lot of white kitchens built in that earlier decades of the 20th century. Molding profiles were very common, like there was a common pattern for the different styles of homes that were being built. So it's easy for a designer to go into a house and say, I'm going to respect the craftsman molding package or the colonial molding package. The reason for this is that a lot of the construction after the World's Fair was built on speculation, like we do now with the developments in the suburbs. People were just building and hoping it would sell. So they would just use the same details and profiles within their three styles, which is pretty much colonial, craftsman, and then later Tudor, and the 40s and 50s. Lath and plaster came from Europe and helped dress up the US. Plaster was fire rated and fire retardant properties. So it's great when you build everything out of wood. If a fire ignites, plaster would help the spread of that fire. It was phased out by sheetrock in the 1960s because it's quite time consuming to build do lath and plaster. Lead and asbestos were used a lot through the 60s until we discovered the danger to our health that these materials caused. Lead was used in paint and glue, for example, due to its high performance. It really does last forever, which makes it tricky to replace, but was banned in the late 60s. If you find asbestos in a home, it's generally in granular insulation that was blown into your attic, and sometimes even into your wall cavities. And it is often in taping joints together at ducts. It can be costly when you try to remodel, because if you want to upgrade your electrical and want to run wires through your attic, you have to abate the asbestos first. And then with lead, you can often encapsulate lead with paint, but if it's chipping at your windowsills, you will want to strip it. And it is people that are licensed in this process and have the proper tools to take care of this have to do that. Now we have indoor plumbing, electricity, telephones, and the automobile. This is North William and Russell Street in 1927. It has changed quite a bit, but it's industrious and pretty. And you can see here also we have some use of brick, and cast stone made of concrete was often used in commercial structures especially, but sometimes in residential structures as well. Here is the fancy home of that early 2 decades of Portland. It's the Barnes Mansion in Northeast Portland. And I would say a lot of the wealthy people, that entrepreneurs and settlers in Portland, wanted to show off their success by building grand mansions. So this one I would call an eclectic style. Again, when in doubt and you don't quite know where the architecture of the home that you're looking at is going, call it the eclectic style, because people, again, didn't just follow the current trends. They were creative. They might have traveled to Europe. They might have traveled to Asia and wanted to incorporate what they had seen around the world in their homes. We have a moment to answer some questions. So pay attention. This is your little bug that you may gain. And here I'm getting my texts from Marty. Excellent. What is the approximate cost to move a house? Is my first question from Marty. Good question, but very hard to answer. I should be talking to Richard, my husband, who moved a few houses. So it really depends on the condition of the house, the size of the house, how far you want to move it, what the house was built of, like is it stone or wood? And so, for example, when we moved the Fried Dunkheimer house at the time, I'm going to call it the Morris Marx house because that's what we called it for the longest time. We had to cut it in half. We had to get permits to be able to take down lighting and stoplights and signage. We had to negotiate with the Portland State University to cut down trees. Luckily, they were planning to cut down those trees anyway because they were building a new structure down there. So it was a very, very, very time-consuming project and process. My husband, heads off to him and his team, showed a lot of tenacity. It took 10 years, and the cost, everything said and done, there was a lot of sweat equity by my husband and by the investors. And so I don't honestly know. I think ARCIFORM's portion alone was over $1 million. But you know, you have an architect navigating the city, you have the investors, you have the site that needed to be purchased. So, and then you want to finish the project inside, which part of the cost, or most of the cost for ARCIFORM, not most, but a lot of the cost for ARCIFORM's portion was, you know, restoring the house inside and out. Marty, is that another question? Question 2. Can you restate? Oh wait, I have to put on my glasses. I apologize. I hope you don't see only reflection, but can you restate the year of the first house built in Portland location? Yes, it's 1842. Next. I'm getting my decades confused today. I apologize. No other questions? Oh, well, that was easy. Okay, so we'll move on. There will be another break. So scribble down your questions as I come along. Now we're starting to look at colonial revivals. Colonial revivals starting being built in 1880s. And they're still being built today. That's a very popular style because it is classic and timeless. It's affordable and adaptable, and it's simple. It can be built simply or glamorous, and it finds its homes in rural settings as well as in urban settings. Identifying features of the colonial structures are the symmetry. That is pretty much your key indicator. And another one is that single ridge going across side to side is also the colonial feature. Accentuated front doors, porches covered with pilasters and extended forward to highlight the entry and give the entry a bit of a formal presence. We have double hung windows with shutters are very popular. And again, the continuous main ridge. I'm going to try to make myself smaller here. Let's see. There we go. That works better. Colonial revival lighting and hardware. So here's what defines colonial designs. It's a very feminine, beautiful aesthetic. It's pretty floral motifs often used in hardware and wallpaper. Molding profiles are curved rather than square. Arches, symmetry again, graceful aesthetic is, think graceful when you think colonial. Railroads were booming, and a lot of people were making a fortune because of the railroads, the opening of opportunities, bringing in materials. And part of that was that Sears geniusly created house building kits. So you can pretty much buy everything you need to build yourself a house, and it will get delivered to your site. And you didn't have a complicated process identifying what you want to build and how you want to build it. The Rose Festival started in the colonial times, very popular. They actually had hosted a Rose Festival queen crowning in my home here. So it was very, very pretty process. Dutch colonials are a bit of a subcategory of the colonial. They have a double pitched gambrel roof. You see here it goes vertical, pretty much vertical. Sometimes the siding of the house was even applied to the vertical part of the roof, and then a little bit of a more of a 45-degree pitch. This helped snow falling off the homes because you didn't want in northern cities and countryside, you wouldn't want snow to build up on your roof to prevent that roof from caving in. Here's a New York Dutch colonial from the 1700s. Its identifying features, again, you can see is the Dutch colonial revivals inspired by European colonial homes with their gambrel roofs with a main ridge. Other similarities to European colonials are the rectangular shape and the 2 stories. And they often had paired chimneys, one at each end. You got to remember that what colonial means is colonialization by European countries of other countries. So they were bringing in their architecture, their lifestyle, their religion, and try to infuse that into the countries they were colonizing. So you see a lot of European influence in colonial architecture. This is from the Dutch inspired. You have Spanish inspired colonial homes, which is from the Mediterranean styles, which is a little bit, it was very popular here in the 1910s and 30s, but kind of was no longer feasible during the Great Depression because it's really not a practical northern style with a lot of rainfall, because it's better for southern climates. But one of the reasons being is that there were often little overhangs, stucco, the connection between the stucco and the casing around windows was hard to keep watertight. Earthquake shaking can cause cracking in the stucco on the outside, but it is a beautiful, beautiful architecture. It does feel like you're walking up to a vacation. It's again very graceful, very romantic. Warm colors were dominantly used. Earth tones really, again, is because when you have a lot of sunshine beating down on architecture, painting it with bright colors will cause fading. So the southern climates often used terracotta tones that faded beautifully. Low-hipped roofs, terracotta tile roofs, tall, narrow, sometimes arched windows, again, to keep the sunlight out and to cool in. And thick walls, again, to help with temperature control. Little Juliet balconies to outside of windows, so you can open your doors, large windows, and have the breeze coming in and close them again. Here are some familiar colonial revivals. It's the Mad Men set, Dawn and Betty Draper's home. Another great TV show that shows the style of that era beautifully. So it helps me often to watch these shows to help me identify what was going on and how people lived during the time the houses were popular. Here's, and I am not familiar with the show. Marty found this for me, so I might be saying this wrong, but the Amityville Horror House in New York, that's the set for that horror movie. And now we're moving on to the craftsman style, which is going parallel with Victorian and colonial and the eclectic style all over Portland. So very, very, very popular Portland style home. It's still popular now, but was especially popular from 1905 to 1930. The identifying features of this architectural style are low-pitched gable roofs with deep overhangs and multiple roof planes. Large tapered and square columns invited you up onto often a full front porch. Decorative rafter tails and large brackets. So rafter tails are what comes past the roof, the rafters that come past the main wall and extend past the exterior wall, and were cut into beautiful shapes in these craftsman style homes. Brackets were often beautifully shaped. Barge rafters were shaped in Asian style, pagoda style detailing. The shaped double pitched roof, only it's steeper and then shallower, was influenced by the Asian style architecture. Groups of 3 or more windows, angular more than curved. It was definitely not, it was much more masculine style, Asian inspired. The structure is also decorative. So rather than applying decoration, the craftspeople would make the structural features decorative. So all these different elements have a structural purpose and then were shaped beautifully to create architectural aesthetic. Electricity helped light the spaces that were often very dark due to the large overhangs and the low-slung nature. Unlike the predecessor, the early teens in the 1890s, we now have casual dress, casual lifestyle, no more corsets. Hair was worn loose. Women were able to actually relax. And men were out of their formal tight knotted ties and were wearing bow ties and much more comfortable clothing, which also translated into the architecture. The craftsman movement was started by William Morris in a counter movement to the Industrial Revolution, which took the craftspeople off and brought a lot of stuff was built and produced by machines. So William Morris wanted to have the skills of the workpeople being embraced again. Gustav Stickley popularized the craftsman movement in America by creating a magazine, The Craftsman, which expanded the movement to furniture and hardware. And the architects Green and Green and Maybach established their firm in California to invite the movement into the West Coast, which then moved it also up to Portland. Beautiful architecture that embraced nature and settled the homes into the environment. Nature was often used as an inspiration for motifs. If you know, it's like the dragonfly was a popular craftsman motif, the ginkgo leaf, very popular, ivy, orchids, beautiful, graceful architecture. Oops, I'm frozen. Let's see here, what do I have to do to make this move along? There. William Morris created beautiful wallpapers. The sisal, if you can see here, was a popular motif. Very motif-driven design, very local. Rather than travel, was localized foliage, local woods that were embraced. You know, importantly, we built a lot with fir and oak because that was what was local versus Victorian era architecture, often shipped in, still local, but often also shipped in exotic woods to show up wealth. Same with colonial mansions. But here you see square, Asian inspired, low slung, cozy. You often walked right into the living room from the front porch, no formal entries. Mica was often used instead of glass, but we have a lot of leaded glass as well that also translated the beautiful motifs into windows and buffet glass. Beautiful earth colored tile was used around fireplaces. Kitchens were white, as I mentioned, because of subway tile, but the fireplaces often have beautiful earth toned tile work. The bungalow is a size of home that was associated with the craftsman style, very popular after the World's Fair and to the 30s. Until then, after that, we would see more of a Tudor style architecture. But the main portions here, the identifying features are low horizontal lines, wide eaves and overhanging gables with exposed rafters, open porches with heavy columns and solid construction, often introducing stone and masonry into the architecture to help settle the house into its environment. They had mail order kits that all across the country. They're often square or rectangular floor plans with 1 to 1.5 story high. Then have a front-facing gabled roof in the dormers or on the porches or the main roof line. Often sided with wood lap or shingles, but also stone, brick, concrete, block, or stucco. One often walks right into the comfortable living room from the front porch. These are cozy, small, very efficient homes that are just wonderful. Oh. The Portland Foursquare, a very popular home shape built from 1900 to 1920. These shapes could either be colonial inspired, they can be eclectic, they could be craftsman. It's mainly the shape of the home, which is square, has a pyramid style roof, it's 2 stories with a full front porch. The floor plan was laid out in 4 rooms on the main floor with an entry, living room, dining room, and kitchen, and 4 bedrooms on the second floor. Very efficient floor plans, not much wasted space with hallways. The rooms would open into each other to make maximum use of space. And they could then be either interior with decorated with colonial or built out with colonial style millwork, craftsman style millwork, or a bit of both. The prairie style, popular from 1900 to 1920 as well, was inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture in Chicago on the East Coast mostly. Frank Lloyd Wright was very much inspired by Asian architecture, and so what that means is we have low-pitched roofs with large overhangs, and we have several levels. You have a main house, and then you have porches or carports winging out from the main house to create that low-slung aesthetic. Often we have angular shapes and clean lines, and a multiple of surfaces that accentuate the horizontal. So they would maybe have a different siding materials on the first floor and then second siding material on the second floor, again, to move everything into the horizontal. Here is an eclectic interior, and while I want to show this because the designer is ingeniously tucking a bed below the main staircase's landing for guests, and when it's not in use, there's a desk for daily bookkeeping. So I really love this design, and you can see how the designer or developer, whoever built this home, created a very ornate colonial style whimsical crown in combination with craftsman millwork that is more square and functional. We have the wainscoting protecting the plaster walls from chairs, and the functionality of the desk, and just a little bit more square detailing in the millwork. So people just like to use what they saw and were inspired by that, just like today. The Tudor style is popular in 1920s through the 30s and again today. It is loosely based on the medieval English architecture. This style evokes a romantic time during increased growth and the Great Depression. Look at how bustling Portland was. The 1930s hardware follows the deco graphic design trends of that time. You see the sharp shapes, graphic, more geometric shapes, real round, not just a little bit of curving, real triangles, crisp lines. It translates into everything, into the architecture as well as the hardware, as well as the wallpaper. And we start seeing a lot of color now, where prior to this, we had a lot of white and earth tones and natural colors. The 30s introduced color. We have Jensen Beach opening up, the amusement park opening up in Jensen Beach. And here's some examples of the colors and ads and graphics and shapes of that time period. Beautiful. It goes into the wrought iron railing design. It goes into LED window designs. The fashion becomes a little bit more tailored again. Now this is a nightgown, a little bit more of the 20s, but then goes into the 30s where the women were wearing a little bit more waist accentuating clothing again, and men were wearing sharp hats and with a little bit of a tilt. Music, jazz clubs, all that was happening. Lots of mirrored walls. It's a cool era. Identifying features of this architectural style are steeply pitched roofs, usually side gabled, dominant front-facing porches, front-facing gables, arches on front-facing doors and porches, lots of arches, mix of siding styles, abundance of texture, cozy in nature. So what they often did, they used brickwork and turned the brick and created patterns and in the brick to create depth. You see here how they combine stone and brick in the chimney design and around the arched entry door. It's very, very comfortable, a very comfortable style. Here's Timberline Lodge, a great example of Tudor architecture. And girls on Jensen Beach having fun. By the 1920s, Tudors were very popular. The roof is present from every angle, so you can walk around the house and see wonderfully whimsical roof shapes everywhere. The style brought an air of Anglo-aristocracy to the middle class in their new suburbs. Stucco brick veneer being a new technology, covered more affordable wood framing. Builders added medieval details to mimic thatched cottages and stone manors. Half-timbered gables appears on all sides of Tudors. Half-timber is this detail where you have wood framing stucco or brick. And in the original methods, they actually used timbers and then laid in brick in between the timbers to create pattern. Nowadays, we just apply a molding to look like half-timber. A variety of windows and door shapes and styles adds character and whimsy. Post-war Tudors were informal and inspired by storybook architecture, though traditional versions were still built into the 1930s. Post-war Tudors were informal and inspired by storybook architecture, though traditional versions were still built into the 1930s. So the storybook architecture you see around Portland, where it looks like a little witch lives there, or you see Hansel and Gretel walking through it. That is storybook architecture. My husband loves it. This style was out of fashion by 1945 and it returned in the early 21st century. Here's a Tudor style home being built in 1928 up in the Southwest Hills. This is actually one of my best friend's home, and she found these pictures. And you can see how the Tudor arch leads into a front door with a little front porch and then a different type of arch, and the living room window and a bay window at the sitting room, and you have a little bit of a half timber style in the gable end, and this like a little bit whimsical design at the dormer. So mixes of siding and a little bit of brick here and a little bit of brick there. This is a beautiful example of a Tudor home. And here are some more examples. If you really want to see some fun examples, go to Peacock Lane in Portland. Try not to go now because it's a very busy season for Peacock Lane as they do a huge amount of lighting. So the lines of cars going around the blocks, it's very busy. I mean, you can go now if you're willing to wait. It's a beautiful display, but you won't really be able to see much of the architecture. I would suggest you do that in the summertime or maybe springtime and the houses are visible. Yeah, here you can see the little bit combination, beautiful timber porch. Front little dormers are pretty often present. Mixes of siding. It's just a beautiful style, cozy, cozy, cozy. And now we come to talking about cottages. Now the cottage is again not so much a style as a size of home. So if you're not sure, you see a small house, call it a cottage and you're good. This style of home was built in majority of them in the 1935 to 1950s. It's a little house that could and was built rapidly during the Great Depression and World War II to house workers and the GIs that pursued the American dream. Identifying features are small, generally one story, minimal detailing, steeper pitched gable roofs, and many architectural styles. So here we have an example of your craftsman cottage. And you can see a little bit the Asian influence, simple though. It's built cheaply for people to have their own home. They can't afford a lot. And so here we have a Tudor cottage. You see a little bit of an arch, mixes of siding, a little bit of a gable here and there. And then the colonial cottage, simple, not super symmetrical, but you have your center front door, you have your double hung windows, simple siding. And then mid-century cottage, and we'll talk about mid-century elements a little bit more coming up, but this is your mid-century cottage. Simple, horizontal, and functional. The Cape Cod house shape is also very common in the 1930s to 50s in Portland. It has a 1.5 story, so it's a little bit bigger than just a cottage. Steeply pitched front-facing roof, symmetrical features with centered front doors, panel windows with shutters, and the later Cape Cods often had 2 dormers facing the front of the home. They're small homes between 1,000 to 2,000 square feet. They tend to have small rooms, and most were built, and the ones that were built in the 50s include attached or semi-attached garages. So this is the Cape Cod. And I'm taking a break again for you to answer some questions. Let me have a little drink. And there's Marty with her questions. Getting my glasses. Alrighty, Marty, let's see. What kind of industry jobs supported the growth of Portland after 1905? Very good, that's a good question. Well, a lot of industry was, of course, in the lumber industry. We still have a lot of lumber industry. What else? Livestock. We have a lot of industry like fruit, like it's similar to now. We have fishing, orchards, so apples, pears, plums, all that, lots of agriculture, lots and lots of agriculture. We have very rich soil here. And then the fish. Fur trade was rampant. There was a lot of the gold rush coming up from California, bringing up people, and then we're building the towns. The trade was huge. The people that really made, like the mansions that were built, like the Piddock Mansion, for example, was a lumber baron. The Coleman Scott House was owned by the founder of the Oregonian, so newspaper. This house, he was a merchant, is in White house, which I'm living in. He is a merchant, so a trader of merchandise. Yeah, but I think mostly agriculture and the lumber industry in Portland. I hope, cattle. I hope I'm not lying, and I hope I'm not being too superficial, but that's what I know. And we have another one. What is a bungalow when it is a bungalow, not a craftsman, or vice versa? Very good. So a bungalow style house, a bungalow house was mostly built during the craftsman. It's not a colonial bungalow. So bungalow and craftsman go hand in hand. But you can build a large craftsman style home that is not a bungalow. Does that make sense? Like you can have a Portland Foursquare that's a craftsman style, or you can have a Portland cottage that's a craftsman style, but you can't have the bungalow is only always craftsman. I hope that makes sense. There's another question coming. Can you elaborate on the half timber element? Is it structural? So half timber. So no, it's not structural. It's a decorative element. And in the Tudor period, where you really just build timbers, you put timbers at an angle or in a pattern, and then between that, that would structurally hold up the house. Yeah, so it's structural, and then between that, you build brick in different patterns. So both of it is structural. Both of it provides a structural element as well as a decorative element. So, but nowadays, when you see the half timber style, it's a decorative detail. It's just applied like siding between stucco. So no longer structural. But yeah, it used to be a way of building that was both structural and decorative. No more questions. Well, that makes it easy. Okay. And here's again your little certification bug. I think it's really cute. I think it's very decorative. So I can't wait to send those to people that are answering our questionnaire. Okay, ranches. So ranch style homes, again, it's a bit of a shape rather than necessarily a style, because you can apply colonial aesthetic to a ranch shaped house. But so it's the style of house, low slung, one story, without dormers. Oops, I can take off my glasses so you guys can actually see my eyes. Moderate to wide overhangs, often attached garages, has large picture windows facing the front of the house. They would be rectangular, L or U shaped, and again, horizontal lights. They're moderate to wide overhang. They are built in the suburbs, mainly on larger properties, to show off the American dream. They were inspired by the ranchero of like New Mexico and Texas, because they fit the American lifestyle. They're easy to maintain, easy to circulate in, easy to build, generous. They can be both small and big, easy to maintain, and they are convenient. So convenience was word of the day as women started to have a voice, and women are, as we all know, practical creatures. Ranch interiors are generally open with living, dining, and family rooms blending into each other. Experimentation with new materials, fixtures, and fittings was successful to varying degrees. So I will talk a little bit about that more when I talk about materials used during that era. Ranch styles was influenced by increased reliance on the automobile. They're practical and convenient. Their single-story living is great for seniors and children and those with mobility issues. They're really quite perfect homes. Trying to clean a gutter on a Victorian is a much different story than trying to clean a gutter on these ranch-style homes. Replacing the roof is cheaper. I mean, everything is just easier to do. They were cheap to build and to maintain. Mid-century modern is also very, very innovative. So they're inspired by science, nature, and inventions of that era. So here you can see when wealthy people and their architects had some ideas that were totally breaking the bounds of anything that I've come before. Materials in the 1950s came from all the innovations that are happening during the Second World War, for airplane designs and car designs, and just in general, just industry and innovation was rampant. Space travel was being talked about. So here we have plastic, plywood, fiberboard, composites that are siding materials. You have, aluminum being used as siding, acoustical tiles, and these can have high levels of what's called volatile organic compound, VOCs. So people weren't quite aware yet of what some of these building materials could do to your health. Asbestos was used as a fire retardant in composite products like wallboards, floor tile, adhesives, plumbing, and so forth. That was common in pipes and paints and other finishes because of its great performance. Insulation often have contained formaldehyde. So we have to be very careful when we tackle the remodel of these homes to not get into trouble. So we are very careful, and we are certified, ARCIFORM is certified to deal with these things. But plastics, acrylics, and resins are now available. That wasn't available before. Plexiglass, bakelite were popular for lighting fixtures, knobs, telephones, radio handles, sheet laminates for countertops, acrylics, curtains, carpets, and upholstery. And think of the colors that were popular. Color was everywhere. Portland was inspired by what was happening in Europe prior to the war. Here we can see, and you can still see the inspiration of these great architects. In today's architecture, we can build open floor plans because we have now steel that can span huge distances and open up. Glass can be produced in huge sheets, where before you would have little sheets, little piece of glass, which was the reason for a lot of the divided light patterns on the houses built prior to this. We have large expanses of concrete being used that can float above glass. Inside was brought to the outside, and outside was brought to the inside. So there was a lot of new development in options that opened up a huge spectrum of options for architects. This is a house designed by Saul Zaig for Philip Feltman, and you can see that the shapes changed. Here has a bit of a ranch style, but the overhangs go past the house to combine to the both interior and exterior living. The ceiling materials of the insides were brought to the outside to connect the two. Windows were brought all the way down to the floor, again to connect the inside with the outside. Structural elements were used as decoration and purpose. Nothing was superfluous. Here you see next to the door, you have vertical lights that bring in bring in light into the entry, but still provide privacy and create a cool design feature. We have cedar, we have, so it was Salzig's features were cantilevered, low-pitched gable roofs, vertical tongue and groove, cedar siding, and deep and wide overhangs. Flush surfaces continuing inside and out, but also he layered his floor plans. He would have a sunken living room and elevated kitchen space. And here you see a house designed by a popular Portland architect of the time, the Belushi house. He actually designs this for the Berg family. And then when they sold the house, when they sold the house, he bought it from them because he loved it so much. It has open floor plans, connecting the inside with the outside. It has a beautiful courtyard. It's a very sculptural element. And here you can see pictures of his son who lives, of how his son lives in that house today. So it's stayed in the family. It's a beautiful piece of Portland history. Then the houses were inspired by the space age, imagining the future. The news were full of traveling to the moon, rocket ships, and innovation. So a lot of the shapes of the 60s were, little spaceships, little satellites, stars and moons, and just that sort of space travel aesthetic. Under the sea, above the sea. Watch some of the old James Bond movies. They're great. They show great architecture. Here is Elvis and Priscilla Presley's honeymoon hideaway. It was considered the house of tomorrow. Now, it didn't really become the house of tomorrow, but it, sunken living rooms, interior, extra materials brought into the interior to connect nature with your living space. And again, it looks like a spaceship. Musical icons of the 60s and 70s and the lifestyle of that time period was very rebellious, very thinking out of the box, a counter movement to the restraints of the early 50s. Drugs were part of lifestyle. So outside thinking while high was, creating some crazy shapes and forms and colors and textures and just liberty from anything confining. So anything went. Now materials weren't necessarily used to last forever. Houses were built kind of fast and furious. So they're kind of deteriorating more so than the houses built earlier. But they are very, another element that became part of the conversation was sustainable building. This is the solar home in Fire Island in New York State, where the architect incorporated solar panels on the roof. We have cast concrete walls that would create radiant heat and cooling for the different temperatures. There's a lot of innovation now being considered for sustainable building. The Aqua Star floating home in Portland, while built in 1984, is a great example of that 60s and 70s creative thinking when it comes to architecture. If you want to take a ride down the Willamette, you will see this house. It's in great shape, still very much an icon in Portland. Then that again was counteracted by more traditional 80s design. So, you go from one extreme to the other. You have your free-spirited 70s that then were like, oh, this is exhausting. Back, let's look into our past to find some architectural inspiration so we don't have to think too much outside the box. We now go back to loose interpretations of the styles that came before. So here you have a craftsman style interpretation of a current night of an 1980s house. This is still going built like this today in the suburbs and the developments around Portland. They are more cost effectively built than your original craftsman. And sometimes proportion dictated by building code will also kind of fight your horizontal slung aesthetic of the craftsman, but they definitely work together, the current lifestyle and the current house style and the craftsman style architecture. Here's some interiors of the different decades. You can see, like in the 1910s and 20s, this is a remodel that we did in a bungalow. White, simple shaker style doors, subway tile on the wall, as backsplashes, Carrara marble as counters. That was very popular again because it was white. Butcher block was common because it was available and cheap. The farm style sink, what maybe have been on legs at the time, but now with wanting to hide garbage and such below the sink, we put a little cabinet under there. Little schoolhouse type light fixtures, pretty. Then we come to the 1980s, which in the 80s, the French style kitchen was popular, which was really very, very loosely based, almost was actually a French style kitchen. But people would travel and they would come back and they would want to incorporate what they saw in Europe in their own houses. And then in the 1990s was more the British dark cherry wood, a need for grandeur, double height ceilings, lots of shapes of windows. I guess the more complex you can make it, the more expensive you built, the more wealthy you looked. Can lights were starting to pummel the ceilings. And then we come now to the current style, which is kind of like a farmhouse, Victorian farmhouse American. Simple, has a bit of craftsman elements, or the 1910s and 20s style. With the subway tile, the Carrara marble, the whites. It's a very common style nowadays. It's turning a little bit more currently into, we are seeing more color again, but really currently craftsman kitchen. And here are examples of how we now build Victorian style, craftsman style, colonial, and Tudor. So current, yet really a revival of those styles, and nothing really new. Unless you look at the McMansions. With the McMansions and I have a bit of a strain. We don't have a good relationship. I don't quite see the point. As you see these large entryways, the double tall entries and entryways that seem out of proportions and kind of forced upon the homes. You have the huge entries that have that formal effect when you walk into a home to kind of show maybe that you're wealthy. I'm not really sure, because to me that kind of seem pointless, walking into a formal living room and a formal dining room only to be then directed into the back of the house where everyone lives, because we have single story kitchens, family rooms, TV rooms, where everyone actually wants to be and hang out. So they're a bit of an oddity to me. There's like no real style. The complicated roof is expensive to build and doesn't have a purpose. So yeah, it's just a show of wealth, I believe. It's a bigger is better sort of attitude, which kind of goes with the current car preference too. It seems to be that big cars are better than small cars, but everyone is different and everyone has their thing. So this is a very, very common architectural style that you see all over the suburbs. The 21st century, modern, contemporary, again, you can see how we're still inspired by the architecture of the early 1920s, and teens. So you see the Victorian farmhouse, vertical, tall windows, has a little bit of the colonial with a continuous style of the roof, architecture. In a modern style with the different siding horizontally applied with some of the natural materials, and then you have a little bit of a Victorian element in this home. So people are more creative. We can be a little bit more diverse because we have access to everything. The internet provides us inspiration, and And then you got to be able to build in small spaces now because we have infill structures that come about. This is what I'm going to be following up with in the handout that I'm going to be emailing you guys. Portlandmaps.com is a great resource. It'll let you, when you type in the address that you're interested in, it'll have the year the house was built, the current owner, the tax information, sometimes the style, size, all kinds of useful information. Historic review, we talked a lot about the old homes of Portland, and Portland is very proud of this resource we have, and we have designated old homes like my house to being on the Historic National Registry, or we have neighborhoods that are designated historic. So this means we have to go a little bit of due diligence, a little bit through, we have to deal with a little bit of bureaucracy. Here's a list of some of the historic neighborhoods you find in Portland, and you can also again find this on Portland Maps. And the reason why we want to live in these neighborhoods and we're old house lovers is because they have old houses and have preserved that history. But to be able to preserve that, we have to, go through if you want to make a change to our home, build an addition, remodel a garage, anything on the exterior, we have to jump through some hoops. So check with your neighborhood website for links and process information. Meet with your neighborhood association to get on the good side, because they will help you. They're there to assist, and they're there to keep their neighborhood beautiful. You may want to meet with a city representative for an early assistance meeting, just to make sure that you don't design something that they will ultimately not allow you to build. And write down the name, the name of the person you met with, their title, and the date you met with them. In addition to design criteria to follow from the city, some neighborhoods have their own criteria that need to be met. Take pictures of comparable projects in the neighborhood. Create scaled drawings of the existing facades and the work you're proposing. Create a site plan. Submit detailed specs of windows, doors, hardware, and lighting of what is there versus what you plan to replace it with. So for example, if you're replacing windows, they will want you to draw a section through the current window, and then they want you to show a section of the window detail that you're planning to use to replace that old window with. Create a narrative about the proposed work. Know what you ask for. The fee structure is tricky, and even often the people at the city don't quite know what to charge you with. And without a city group's approval, they will not approve your permit for the project. So this is important work. ARCIFORM does this all the time. So if you like, please contact us and we will help you with this process. This is a before and after of the Coleman Scott house, where we built an addition on top of the original one-story kitchen bump out at the back here. We built this master bathroom and covered porch and balcony. And this was a tricky process because not only is this building on a National Historic Register, but it's also in the Irvington Historic Neighborhood. So we had to jump through a bunch of hoops to be able to do this. Here we added back doors and changed the window configuration a little bit. And because this house was on the National Register, we also had to go through the process. So thank you for joining us today. I am ready for some more questions. One moment, we'll see if Marty has some more questions for me, and I got to put on my glasses. Let's see. Waiting. Marty, any questions? No? That she's typing. Yes, there are questions. She's typing. One moment. What about old house smells? Where do they come from, and ideas to get rid of or improve them? That's a very good question. We actually thought we should do an odor ARCIFORM, like create a perfume of old attic smells and plaster smells and such, but of course it would not have probably made good sense. So, so getting rid of them, when your old house smells, it generally is because it might have sat abandoned for a while. So the moisture might have had an opportunity to creep in. So it is important when you go on vacation or leave the house sitting or are in the process of selling it to keep the heater on or the cooling, just to keep the temperatures inside the house moderate. So smells often come from the attic or the basement because that's where most water leaks are happening. So you will want to investigate. There is they have tools where you can use, I believe it's infrared, or they can change it. So they can trace temperature and moisture content in your house by using infrared, I believe. And they can see kind of like where there's cool spots, where there's warm spots, where it's moist. So really is when we start a project and the house has these sorts of scents in it, we always suggest to the client to go from the outside in and top down. Because when the outside is not protected, the inside is not protected. So you want to make sure your roof is new, your windows work well, the flashing details around the windows and doors are properly sealed. The plumbing in old houses can often have leaks. So we want to check if there's any water seepage from plumbing fixtures. So that needs to be, of course, fixed. And then in the basement is often a culprit because people would plant foliage and trees and shrubbery and such too close to the foundation, and then the roots of that and shrubs and trees would hold moisture, and that would seep into your foundation and cause moisture issues and cause instability in the foundation. So your inspector should, my connection is unstable. Good. So you want to landscape, you want to remove a lot of that if you can. You want to cut away your trees and overhanging branches from that regular basis. Make sure they drain the water away from the house. Make sure your landscaping drains away from the house. So it's jelly moisture. All evil comes with the moisture of these houses. So really moisture control is key. And then heating up the house will also help evaporate moisture that might have come in and help dry that up. Okay, I hope that helped. Is cottage interchangeable with workman's bungalow? Cottage is kind of like a cottage. It's kind of like a one-size-fits-all label that you can put on a small house. Even if you see a Cape Cod and you're not really sure if it's a Cape Cod or a cottage or a bungalow, call it a cottage. You can't go wrong there. But a bungalow is generally, if you see a small house that has lots of craftsman details, it is likely a bungalow. But cottage is also correct. Cottage is just a small house. Yes, are there books about Portland houses and history? Let me go get some. I have a lot of them. So these are just a few that I have sitting right here. There's more, and I can follow that up. We can include that in our follow-up email. This is a book about 19th Street in Portland and has beautiful interior pictures and exterior pictures of Northwest Portland 19th Street. It's a wonderful book and it's kind of falling apart. Then we have a field guide to American houses. And then there inside of this, you can see about Portland and just different architectural styles. This is kind of a Bible that I like to use. It is also lovely to maybe look at other architectural styles or how the colonial style was maybe interpreted on the East Coast or in the Central States. It's fun to see. And they're nice drawings and pictures and labels for everything. It's a big book, though. So, and then architectural Oregon styles. It's not necessarily just Portland, but Oregon has it through all kinds of more earlier centuries. But then we also have mid-century at the back. Oopsie, I have to be careful with these books. There are a lot of books. I have more. I have to go run through my house to find them, and we will make a list for you of them. Good question. Yes, we do work on post-1970s homes. Our craftspeople are very craft-oriented, if you will, and some of the newer homes don't need as much talented craftspeople as maybe older homes do. But yes, we do. We don't advertise that much, but we often work on homes built later. And we definitely have design for them. Marty is typing. I hope that answered the question. It was an easy one. Go on our website. My website, we try to post a diverse amount of pictures because I like to show the diversity of our clients and their houses. We're not a trendy company. We are more, the house helps, the design process, and the owner helps the design process, but rather than maybe the neighbors and the current trends. So another question I have here is, where do you find rules to approved changes when homes are on the National Register? So you want to go online. So Irvington, for example, the Irvington Neighborhood Association has put together a nice little list of details that they would approve. But I always say is let your house be your teacher, and let the neighboring houses be your teacher. So look at like what siding was being used, what types of window were being used, what materials were being used, and then that should help you make the right decisions. But the neighborhood associations have often really good guidelines to help you at least get started. And we are actually in conversation with the city right now. The city is trying to put together a guideline booklet as well, and we have been able to help a little bit with that, because current codes sometimes do not go hand in hand with what the historic preservationists allow. So you have to juggle that a little bit yourself, because the city the people at the city know what they know. They don't know what the next department knows. So you do need to be doing your due diligence, and it can be tricky. I hope that helped. But yeah, go on the local websites. They're great. The salt box style is a 1.5. So the salt box style. So you have it's a 1.5 story home where it's a gable roof, where the gable end, where the one roof is taller than the other. I would have to Google that really quick to show you salt box. It's easier shown. I'm sorry. Salt box style house. Let's see if I can find a quick image. Image. Ta-da! Right here. So you're gonna go in the whole house. So it's pretty much simple. I hope you guys can see it. It's a simple square house where one of the roofs goes below the other side of the roof. I hope that was. It's easier to Google it, I think, if you guys want to see it. It's a cute house style. It's not super common in Portland, but you can see it in Portland. Hope that answered it. Marty? When did old growth fir get used for flooring? Can it still be sourced? Can it be restored? So old growth fir was, in all these old houses, that was pretty much the method of construction, because that's what we had out here. We had very much an evergreen forest and lots of old growth trees. And it was actually the cheap building material of the time. So they would use the fir in the bedrooms, and they would use oak in the public rooms, because oak was more expensive, it's harder, and it's more formal. So, and what old growth really is, what makes it old growth is that it has really tight grain. So it's vertical, it's clean, it's just a good building material. And of course, with all this logging we have done over the last 100-some years, old growth fir is hard to find. And it's actually a problem for us at Versatile, because the windows we built, all these old windows were built of old growth fir, which was has a good performance ability. It repels water, it's stable, it's easy to handle. Where nowadays the 4Bs built in with like our 2x4 lumber is like more porous, less dense, and so it's more expensive. Like, just to give you an idea, a 2x4 stud costs $7 now. It's just crazy. So it's a bit of a supply and demand issue where we still have a high demand. There's a lot of resources out there, salvage yards that will actually collect the fur floors that have been removed from old houses that we then get and patch in if they need to patch in a floor. And what you also want to check with regards to floor restoration is you can lift up a floor register and see it's usually tongue and groove, where you have, one board has the groove, the other one has a tongue, and they come together. If the floor has been sanded too often that you can see the tongue, that means you can't refinish it again because now they don't hold together anymore. So you want to talk to an expert about your floors. And but most of the times, yes, we can restore the old growth fur floors. So thank you very much. We will try to address the rest of your questions via email. And I want to go one more slide because I wanted to personally invite you, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, to a spotlight series hosted by Snowbee Design on the 19th this weekend. And I will be talking a little bit of my favorite things about being a designer and how we go about it at ARCIFORM, about the trade of being a designer and how we all manage, or how I manage my anxieties that come along with that. And so yeah, I would love to have you guys tune into that. And with that, I'm going to wish you all a nice afternoon and a very happy holiday season and a great 2021. Stay safe and thank you.